Hello, my name is JT Clark, and I will be presenting on both the positive and negative impacts that the Satanic Panic had on the band AC/DC, as well as examine how the patterns seen during the 1980s Satanic Panic can be applied to conspiracy theories seen surrounding musical artists even today. To understand how this happened to AC/DC, we first need to examine the bigger picture of the Satanic Terror in the 80s. Scholar John Brackett, in his article Satan, Subliminals, and Suicide, he explains how an anti-rock discourse developed through the 80s. He notes that the broadcast of Exposing Satan's Underground in October 1988 was a real turning point in the Satanic Terror that would have been building since the early 80s. Fundamentalist Christian groups, along with media personalities and even some politicians, began linking heavy metal and rock music to Satanism. They claimed that the songs contained subliminal messaging, especially when the records were played backwards. They also had concerns over the album artwork, which was often provocative. These fears that swept through America were amplified by television exposés that portrayed rock as the gateway drug, so to speak, that could lead impressionable young Americans straight into demonic influence, teenage rebellion, and teenage suicide. Travis James Brooks, in his 2024 thesis, The Devil is in the Details, an analysis of the Satanic Panic, he delves deeper into the institutional side of this hysteria. He points out how the Senate held hearings on everything from heavy metal to Dungeons and Dragons, and how satanic lyrics were viewed as a national security threat. The Parents Music Resource Center, or PMRC, played a huge role here. They created their infamous Filthy 15 list that targeted specific songs that they deemed too explicit for children. AC/DC actually earned a spot on this list with their song Let Me Put My Love Into You. The PMRC's goal with this was to lobby Congress to pass into legislation a requirement that these explicit songs had to include a warning label on any of their packaging. That could mean an album or an individual song or record. At the time, this organized pressure led to real censorship attempts and a national atmosphere where any band with vaguely dark-sounding imagery or titles could be branded as dangerous to the youth of America. This institutional fear would ultimately create the perfect environment for targeting specific artists like AC/DC. Given how widespread and mainstream this narrative had become, almost anything a band said or did or put out could be interpreted as containing demonic influence, and AC/DC was certainly one of these bands. For instance, their titles, The Highway to Hell, and songs such as Hell Bells were taken almost as literal endorsements of the occult. Even their name was put up to scrutiny, as people theorized that the name AC/DC actually stood for Antichrist/Devil's Child. In addition to these really loose speculations, there were unfortunately some real-world events that got connected to the band. In Kieran Fisher's article, Satanic Panic, America's War on Heavy Metal in the 1980s, he details how these links were exploited. For example, in 1984, teenager Ricky Casso was arrested for a brutal murder whilst he was wearing an AC/DC shirt. Even just the image of a known killer wearing the band's merchandise was damning in the eyes of the media. However, as bad as that was, what was far worse was the case of a serial killer, Richard Ramirez, also known as the Night Stalker. He was a fan who, I guess his calling card was he left AC/DC hats at the crime scenes of his murders, and reportedly drew inspiration from the song Night Prowler, produced by AC/DC. Whether or not the song was his actual inspiration is up for debate, seeing as the song was really about sneaking around to see a girlfriend, not anything criminal, and it was perhaps a fabrication by media outlets after Ramirez had been arrested. Fisher would emphasize how media outlets milked these connections for all they were worth. intending to paint AC/DC as somehow responsible for encouraging real-world evil and real-world violence. It was classic guilt association. Interestingly, in hindsight, not everyone sees the Panic as being purely destructive towards the images of the stars and bands involved. In her Vice article, Kim Kelly notes that by the mid-1980s, Satan seemed to lurk in every suburb, in every family home, all around America, and parents were throwing away heavy metal records left and right. But Kelly also highlights a key irony. The Satanic Panic, in many cases, backfired. Labeling bands like AC/DC as forbidden fruit only made them even more appealing to the rebellious youths of the era. As the saying goes, all publicity is good publicity. The controversies surrounding these bands ended up only boosting their popularity as well as their sales, rather than destroying their careers as was intended. The same patterns surrounding musical stars are alive and well even today. Modern conspiracy theories surrounding stars such as Beyoncé and Jay-Z face constant Illuminati accusations based on hand signs, stage props, and symbols. Naturally, the evidence is just as circumstantial and speculative as it was in the 80s. Some even capitalize off the controversy. Prominent artist Lil Nas X deliberately played with satanic imagery for artistic effect, which naturally evoked massive backlash. Thus, it is clear that even today we still choose to misread song lyrics, twist symbolatry, and attempt to blame artists for broader social problems. The outstanding difference between the two eras is speed. Instead of slow TV exposés, these ideas are spread instantaneously across social media platforms such as TikTok, YouTube, and Reddit. The psychology and rhetoric, however, remain almost identical. So why do these patterns persist? In both the 1980s and today, these panics tend to emerge during periods of rapid cultural or social change observed not only in the music industry, but in society as a whole. Seeing the world change around them can make people feel anxious, and it's comforting to point at rebellious, highly visible artists as the source of the problem. In conclusion, whether the Satanic Panic be interpreted as a positive or negative force for bands such as AC/DC, they inarguably had very little to do with actual Satanism, and had everything to do with misplaced cultural fear and media amplification. The same flawed thinking, guilt by loose association, exaggerated symbolism, and moral hysteria continues to fuel conspiracy theories even about today's own stars.